Well, hello and welcome to another recording of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. We are back for more news, tech, content, and wisdom from the world of marketing. Joining me, a man on a mission to keep marketing simple, the voice of the Marketing and Finance Podcast, and the author of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and Marketing Plans. I give you Monsieur Roger Edwards.
Oh, thank you so much and welcome everybody. And of course, my co-host is also a man on a mission, this time to demystify digital marketing. He's the host of the Content Marketing Studio video podcast. Please welcome Mr. Pascal Fintoni.
Thank you very much, Roger Edwards. This is episode 45.
45, 5 away from the big 5-0.
I know. Can I also spend a moment to thank all our well-wishers? We've got some lovely messages on LinkedIn, some retweets on Twitter. It's appreciated. You know, as I've said before, we do enjoy producing this show with our colleague Tim Orton, videographer extraordinaire. But it is good to know that there is an audience out there that is also enjoying some of the segments. It feels great, Roger. I mean, we are approaching summer. You can tell from the very light conditions, we are much brighter than usual. I'm happy because my hay fever has not started, but also because we have Hollywood, celebrities in the north of England, not far from you. So we know that Harrison Ford is currently filming Indiana Jones 5 in Bamburgh Castle. And in Alnwick Castle, not far from here, they are also starting the filming Dungeons and Dragons. Really quite exceptional, isn't it?
Wow. I actually saw a photograph somebody tweeted this morning. They'd spotted Harrison Ford at the quayside in Newcastle, just wandering along past the shops and restaurants. So how cool is that?
I mean, what would you do if you bumped into him literally at the quayside? If he was, on your favorite spot when you go and have a coffee on the Saturday morning, would you go and talk and ask for a selfie?
Oh, I don't know. I think if I bumped into him by accident, I'd probably be tongue-tied, or I'd probably say something really embarrassing like, "Hey, how's it going, Han?" or something like that, or call him Junior or so. I don't know. But if I actually saw him across the street, I probably definitely wouldn't have the nerve to go up and say hello. I'm sure he'd be lovely if you did.
Clearly, from what we've seen on the internet, I've just realized this must be some kind of record where we've started the introduction by talking about films. We normally wait a bit longer for this, but once again, thank you very much, viewers and listeners, for humoring us. But this is a style of the Two Geeks and the Marketing Podcast. However, let's begin with In the News.
Facebook is allegedly working on the design of a smartwatch, which will include a heart rate monitor and 2 cameras, a front-facing lens for video calls, and a detachable rear 1080p camera.
Well, HBO Max is promoting its reboot of Gossip Girl using text messaging. Fans of the show can text or call to gain access to exclusive content and voice messages from the series' main character.
Pinterest introduced 2 new features: Shopping List, which lets users save their product pins to receive price drop notifications, and The Goods by Pinterest with exclusive access on selected products.
Vimeo, the online video hosting and publishing platform, is now listed as a public company, an exciting new chapter for the 850 team members and its CEO Anjali Sood.
Virgin Media and O2 have joined forces in a £31 billion tie-up, and the newly formed company is called, wait for it, Virgin Media O2. The merger is said to challenge the dominance of BT, which bought rival EE in 2015.
Well, according to LinkedIn, the labour market for UK graduates is finally improving. Its new Get Hired report shows that technology and digital-based roles are the fastest growing jobs, and communication and problem-solving skills are also in high demand.
Heinz has launched a light-hearted rewards campaign for Canadians stuck in traffic. If you drive at the same speed as its slow-pouring ketchup bottles, which is 0.045 kilometres an hour, you get a free meal at Burger King.
Well, and finally, Sesame Street is making bedtime easier with a new podcast by the Headspace entitled Good Night World, hosting by Alan, the owners of Hooper's Store, alongside characters such as Big Bird, Oscar, and Abby.
Oh, I love Sesame Street.
Oh, absolutely adored it. What a eclectic set of news, Roger. But can I begin straight away with the merger of Virgin Media and O2. Now,
Yeah.
this is a big thing. I've been an O2 customer forever. So that ever since I've had a phone, I think I've been an O2 customer. And I want to start this segment with a bit of a rant, a gentle one, but a rant nonetheless, Roger. I received an email announcing the merger. And I mean, you and I've been in work in marketing for some time. We have viewers and listeners who are in marketing, been working in marketing for some time. Of all the things that they could do in terms of communication efforts, I don't think sending me a link to the privacy policy to read it again was really what I was hoping for from two companies such as Virgin Media and O2. And to date, this has been the extent of their marketing efforts.
I mean, they are notoriously for bad customer service, aren't they? O2, I don't use O2, but I've heard loads of people moaning about their customer service. And even Virgin, who you always think are the epitome of good service, do get a bad press in this area. So actually merging the two brands together and calling them effectively the two brands at the same time is both unoriginal, but also draws attention to the fact that they're merging these two brands together, which don't have particularly good reputations for customer service. So yeah, they've got a bit of work to do to to up their game, I think.
It's just an anomaly, and I think whatever they try to do in the near future will be too little, too late. So tell me why, as a long-term O2 customer, I should get excited about Virgin Media, because to your point, I've heard primarily negative things about Virgin Media, perhaps unfairly. Maybe there are millions of happy customers and only a fraction are unhappy. But I've chose to go with O2 and not Virgin Media for those reasons. So now I'm left thinking, well, is there an advantage? Is it just simply that, they want to take on the might of BT? But it was just this idea of, silence is not a good thing when you have such a significant event happening. And more importantly, if all you can come up with is to send me a link to your privacy policy so that I can read it again with whatever changes you've made because of the merger, I think you're missing out on, communicating well with your current customers.
Yeah, let's face it, we don't wake up in the morning thinking, today I'm going to read Virgin Media O2's privacy policy. It's going to be so exciting.
I wanted to then quickly ask your reaction about Pinterest. Now, Pinterest is a fascinating platform, you'll agree, Roger. That is to say, they've never made the headlines for the wrong reasons, unlike many others out there, such as Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and so on. Pinterest feels like a good place to be. But then I'm torn about those new features. Are they losing their core kind of offering? Are they losing their raison d'etre if it becomes essentially the place to go to be told when there is discounted products?
Yeah, it's a strange move, isn't it? Although I can understand what they're doing. And I guess Pinterest is a very product-orientated platform, isn't it? Even though it's generally about pictures that you pin, and you could argue, well, that's the same as Instagram, isn't it? I've always felt that Pinterest does have that sort of product orientation. So, people post lots of pictures of cakes and knitting patterns and recipes and this, that, and the other. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Pinterest has always been one of those social media platforms that I often forget about until an alert pops up on my phone or I read something like this in the news about it. It is quite innocuous. And maybe we shouldn't slate them for trying something a little bit new like this, because what I will say is whether I like the idea or not, at least it's different, and they just haven't gone and copied stories or reels or Snapchat. They've actually come up with something which you could argue is unique to Pinterest itself.
And interestingly, last year, Pinterest was almost voted informally by users as the best social network when it comes to well-being and simply being amongst lovely people who have really positive outlook on life as opposed to what is happening out there. And in fact, they had a conference, I think late last year, if not early this year, Roger, memory's failing, in and around well-being and the role of social networking and everything that comes with it. So you're right, there is a very, very strong user base for Pinterest. You and I operate more in B2B typically, so we don't always think of it, but I just think it's nice that once again, it's always well thought of by both users and, you could argue, practitioners in terms of marketing and sales, and they're doing things very, very differently. Talking of doing things differently, Heinz and HBO Max. So speaking with Heinz, here's a brand that is so clever with its marketing campaign. It always makes me smile. It always feels very, very witty. And what they've done here, which is something that I've heard a lot about in the past in terms of advice, but I could never find a good example, this idea of lean on your faults. So we know, I don't know about you, but I would always favor a squeezy bottle of ketchup than the official glass bottle, because it's such a pain to get the ketchup out of a glass bottle. But they're leaning on that fault to create a campaign, frankly, that is making the headlines all over the US.
Yeah, it's very, very clever. I have an admission to make, Pascal. I don't like Heinz ketchup. I don't like it. And, you know, I once knew a friend of mine who used to put Heinz ketchup on everything. Like, he used to put it on his breakfast, which is probably okay. But if he had a curry, he would put ketchup on his curry. If he had roast beef and Yorkshire puddings, he would put ketchup on that as well. And I'm just thinking, for the love of God, don't do that, please. It's just horrible stuff. But yeah, I mean, it is an iconic brand, and that whole idea of how long it takes to gently squeeze itself out of the glass bottle, it can be excruciating. So I would always, if I did like it, Pascal, I would be in your camp and I would go for the squeezy bottle and make sure it just went straight out onto the plate.
So here's the oddest survey from Two Geeks Marketing Podcast. In the comments below, let us know, are you the squeezy bottle type of person or the glass bottle type of person? I just love the idea that they had Heinz engineers actually tracking and measuring the time it takes for the ketchup to come out of the bottle. But wonderful way to get word of mouth marketing. And on that then, HBO Max, I mean, obviously this is a US brand, but the idea of using text messaging. Now, when you read the full story, Roger, the reason why the chief marketing officer went for that is because they found that digital only was getting tired and very, very crowded. And they wanted to appeal to the audience that actually were also very fond of text messaging because of that generation, but also they wanted to make the PR headlines, and they got what they wanted.
No, it's a good use of technology, and it's interactive, and I think people love the interaction, don't they? And that feeling that if you do something, you're getting something that somebody else hasn't got, that exclusive content.
And for
voice
me,
messages.
Yeah, and for me, Roger, someone that is a digital marketing consultant and trainer, that just made me stop on my tracks thinking, yes, it's not always about digital, and there's got to be other ways to communicate. And here's a fine example. Very finally, before we move on to the next segment, Roger, are you a smartwatch owner and user?
No, I'm not. My wife has one, and it's an Apple Watch, and obviously it's very clever. I've just never seen the point in them, to be perfectly honest. I go in and out of love with watches. I've got quite a few watches, and I'll go through stints of wearing them all the time, and then not wearing them. But I've never really fancied the Apple Watch. Interestingly enough, one of the articles I nearly picked today for Content Spotlights was an in-depth look at this potential Facebook watch. And we know that Facebook are not exactly covering themselves in glory over their data policy and how they handle privacy and all of that sort of thing. And from what I can gather, there's going to be a few things that people might be worried about if this watch actually does come to the market. So that'll be interesting to see what Facebook do to counteract any criticism they may have there.
Yeah, and the reaction from the interweb has been being perplexed about what would you want to have detachable camera. I have cameras on my phone. It was just kind of a very, very confused message out there. But of course, they are just allegedly working on the design, Roger. So we'll have
which
to
probably
wait
means it's about to launch next week.
Absolutely. Right. Well, thanks very much for going through those news swiftly with me. But let's slow things down and move on to the next segment, the content spotlights. Okay, Roger, I know you've been online, you've been subjecting yourself to the algorithmics, you've been down the YouTube rabbit hole. What wonders have you found in the interweb for us today?
Well, Pascal, I'm going to talk about customer experience this week. And funnily enough, we've already talked about the subject back in the news section when we were talking about the customer experience offered by Virgin and O2. And you and I have had this conversation on the podcast quite a bit over the last 45 episodes. Now, the majority of the episodes of the Two Geeks in the Marketing podcast have been recorded during lockdown. And you've said this, and I've said this, that quite a lot of companies seem to be continually using the pandemic as an excuse for really poor customer service and customer experience. You know, so due to the pandemic, we can't answer the phone. Due to the pandemic, we can't get back to you for a week. Due to the pandemic, you know what it is. And you're just sitting, come on, this is an excuse, isn't it? And I came across this article. It's in the Inc. magazine website, and it's written by Martin Zwilling. And the headline is 8 Steps to Delivering a Consistently Memorable Customer Experience. And I guess what he really means there is memorable from the point of view of it being remarkable and being something that you want to talk about positively, as opposed to what you and I did just before, which was pretty much talk negatively about the customer experience with Virgin and O2. And what Martin's saying in this article is that, you know, with marketing, we continue to be obsessed with the digital communications tactics. And again, that's something we've said on the show lots of times. But he's saying even marketers that get the wider marketing mix, the product, the price, the location, and the promotion, as well as the strategy, even they often miss the importance of customer experience and customer service. And of course, some people have included an extra P or a C within the marketing mix to denote customer service. So it caught my attention. That was the first reason it caught my attention for the headline. But then when I started to look at the 8 of the steps, number 2 really caught my attention because it reminded me of an experience that I'd had. So what I'm not going to do today is go through all 8 of these steps. I might just tell you quickly what they are, but I'm not going to go into them in any sort of detail. But the one I want to focus in on is number 2, which is providing training tools and required decision authority for the staff in your business, whatever that business might be, who are delivering the customer experience. Now, Martin uses the luxury hotel chain Ritz-Carlton to talk about this. And basically what he's saying is that the Ritz-Carlton Hotel train their employees extremely well, but every single employee within the Ritz-Carlton chain, whether that employee is a bar person, whether they're a cleaner, whether they're a cook, whether they're a reception operative, each of them is authorized to spend $2,000 per guest without having to clear it with a manager to solve a guest issue, to make sure that that guest has a great experience. Now, just think about that for a moment. $2,000, every single employee could spend that money. And you think about how many, you think you might phone up Virgin Media and they've given you some bad service, and you might say to, well, I think you should compensate me £20 for the inconvenience. You can guarantee that when you're on the phone to Virgin Media, that person that you're on the phone to, well, I'll have to go and check it with my supervisor. And then they'll go and check it with the supervisor, and the supervisor will come back and say, well, my authority is only £10 a month, and so that's all you can have. But it's that level of trust that Ritz-Carlton has in their employees. to allow them to spend that $2,000 per guest, I can actually guarantee that it rarely actually happens, because they'll know intuitively, because of their training, when to do it and when not to. Whereas a lot of businesses like Virgin and others might say, you must be joking to suggest that we would give our staff $2,000 to spend on every employee, because they would have that mindset, wouldn't they? If we give the staff that ability, they'll all be off spending £2,000 5, 6, 7, 10 times a day, and they'll bankrupt us within seconds. And that's the trust element, isn't it? Ritz-Carlton trusts its employees to do this, and it trains them impeccably in the delivery. And I would guarantee that it doesn't happen that often, but when it does happen, the amount of positive feedback they get from that particular guest, from having that problem fixed, will absolutely make it a worthwhile investment. And I've been to the Ritz-Carlton hotel chain on holiday several times, but I was also very lucky back in, it was about 2005, I was actually taken behind the scenes of the Ritz-Carlton operation. It was part of a trip I was on to the States to actually see this training in place. And they really do take it seriously, Pascal, and this whole idea of giving them that pre-approval, I don't have to check it with anybody. So a cleaner could be in a room and, I don't know, they've accidentally dropped as they've stained a coat or something like that. That cleaner could say, fine, we'll get it dry cleaned for you and we'll pay for it. Wouldn't have to run it past anybody, they would just get it done. And that's great customer service. So Martin really just reinforced to me that as marketers, maybe one of the things that we've forgotten is customer experience. And just to finish this off, I'll just read you the 8 things, and hopefully that will encourage you to read the article in full, and the link will be in the notes. So number 1 is hire team members who enjoy customer interaction. Seems obvious, but some people might not get that. Number 2 is the one I've already talked about. Give them the decision ability to pay for things that need to be fixed. Number 3, incentivize and reward employees who delight customers. Number 4, make sure all people have an opportunity to meet customers of all levels. Again, don't hide the cleaners in the background and the chefs in the kitchen. Let them be out there meeting people. Number 5, communicate and be a role model for customer focus. Number 6, build customer relationships to supplement surveys. Number 7, under-promise and over-deliver on all customer requests. And number 8, sponsor experiments to create memorable elements. So really, really interesting article. Not a massive read. It's a 2-3 minute read, but there's lots of really good nuggets in there. So highly recommended.
Well, thank you very much. I love all 8 points, in particular number 4. Would you mind reading it again for me, please?
Yeah, of course. Number 4 was make sure all have the opportunity to meet the customers.
Now, how many companies you and I have worked for or have been consulting for that do not apply this rule?
Absolutely right. And again, you can guarantee that a lot of those people, poor old Virgin Media are getting a slagging on this episode, but you can guarantee that even though those people will be on the phone, they're not actually out there at all, ever actually meeting people. And we all know, pandemic aside, face-to-face and actual proper interaction is a great way to connect with the customer.
And to think, I've got a flashback from many, many years ago when I began my kind of running my business, and I was invited to talk to a actually financial company of all, which is no longer with us for reasons that are going to become clear to you in a moment. So I was asked to really help with the marketing, and it was the early days of blogging, SEO, and that kind of things. And we had a conversation about coming up with content ideas. And I discovered that the marketing department never, ever spoke to customers and never, ever listened to any conversations. And the reaction from the directors, well, no, they're in marketing. The others talk to customers. And I said, well, how on earth are you going to come up with, the FAQs and everything else that you'll need to supplement your marketing activities? Needless to say, I didn't end up working with them or for them. But that just shocked me that the marketing department was in this kind of glass bubble. It was was literally glass panels. That was their department. And they had to come up with content ideas without talking to anybody. And then the other thing that I liked about this article, the reminder that being trained in customer service is not being trained to do the job well. It's to be trained to have at your disposal a range of options when things don't go so well, because that is life. And you and I know that many companies really build wonderful reputations and loyalty by solving problems, not just getting it right first time.
Absolutely right. No, I agree with both of those things. It's not just about being good at your job. It's having the common sense and the intuition to make the right decision for the customer. And again, just to agree with what you said there, you know that my definition of marketing that I include within my book is marketing is a obsessive understanding of the customer. How can you have an obsessive understanding of a customer if you never meet them?
No, absolutely. It is a mindset. It's an attitude when you work in marketing, for sure.
So what have you got this week in your content spotlight, Pascal?
Well, interestingly for me, what I've got is an article that arrived in my inbox at the right time. I just, oddly, have been having many conversations with my customers around hybrid events and hybrid working. And I'm not sure that the term is great or being adopted the right way. And in those conversations, Roger, that I've been having, I sense that the position is that the hybrid, which is this idea of combining face-to-face and virtual, is a lesser alternative to just face-to-face. And the danger is that people may be missing out on the fact that a hybrid may be a wonderful evolution of creating a better experience for employees, for leaders, and of course for customers. Now, this article is written by 𝗧𝗵𝗲, the founder and owner of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Digital, and it was written for a website called digitalleaders.com. Now, digitalleaders.com is almost now a movement, an initiative across academia, public sector, and private sector, where practitioners, thought leaders, and the likes get together to share articles, interview each other, do a podcast. They have annual conferences and so on. And they're looking at ways for digital and tech to make a positive impact in both social and professional lives. And they talk about 5G, Roger. They talk about AI, tech for good, skills and talent, which is the kind of the stream that I follow. And the article that Zoe wrote is entitled How to Make the Right Decisions About Hybrid Working. And I want to use this article to then, have a quick conversation about hybrid events and what our customers should be thinking about. Now, what Zoe is doing, she seems to have also a specialism in the charity sector and third sector. So she's recounting a recent conversation, which is always lovely, that she's had, and using that to invite all of us to really prepare for decision. Her position is that hybrid working and hybrid events are here to stay. And don't make the mistake to think that it's a poorer alternative and option than the face-to-face only or the virtual only. So she has a segment in the article called Use Hybrid to Raise Your Game, which I think is a perfect way to summarize the intent there. And she's giving an account of a conversation she had with the manager or director of the Youth Hostel Association, who has found that the hybrid working has allowed them to recruit better talent from across the UK as opposed to just locally, but also provide better customer service. So this idea of, well, we can't wait to go back to normal and drop the virtual and digital would be a big, big mistake, which I'm sure you'll agree with. Then she talks about this conversation she had with the director of MS Trust, whereby you've got to find a way to include your staff in the deliberation and decision making to come up with your version of what a hybrid working and hybrid event might look like. And they give some examples of how they went about gathering the feedback and the opinions of their staff, because the risk that you run, Roger, in big organization is that people will tell you what they think you want to hear, or they'll say, well, I go in the office because I think that's what the boss would like me to do. So what they do, they organize walk and talk meetings, which I've not done for a while, I must confess, but this idea of literally you go for a walk in fresh air and you talk it through. they organize, which I think would be lovely to attend, garden pub parties and meetups to get, and they also had online kind of discussion boards and so on, people could contribute. This idea of gathering all that kind of feedback to make sure that when you make a decision as a team leader, it is one that people have obviously been included in and participated. And finally, in a segment called Test, Learn and Improve, she gives an account of a conversation with the CEO of the funding network who had to shift all their fundraising event online. And they discovered that attendance was 71% higher online, and that more importantly, donation and fundraising was increased by 67% at events that historically were done only face-to-face or in the physical sense. So they're planning to obviously stick to their hybrid event, but they are very, very carefully making sure that neither the face-to-face nor the online version feel like the poorer relation. And that to me is what I would like to get a reaction on, but also I think the conversation we need to be having with our customers. You and I have been invited to speak at virtual conferences. I hear from my customers, they just can't wait to go back to normal. But actually, isn't hybrid the new way forward?
Yeah, now I'm in this situation myself with the big conference that I do the marketing for every year, Protection Review Conference, because that's going to be in December. And whilst we had to run it entirely as a virtual event last year, we're hoping that it will be an in-person event this year. Now, the fact is that working with that conference, and we've done loads of mini conferences over the course of the year, has shown us that when you hold an event in a venue like a hotel or a conference centre, you have a finite number of seats. You know, whether it's 300 or 3,000, once you get to that limit, that's the end of it. You can't squeeze anybody else in. But when you do it virtually, of course, you can have as many people as you want there. And one of the things that we found was that in general, because that conference was limited to about 350 seats, we tended to attract the managers, the senior managers from financial services into the room. But quite a lot of the more junior staff or younger staff never got to attend the conference because they weren't senior enough, in inverted commas. But the virtual version opened that up to a wider audience. And so our thought process is now, it has to be a hybrid event in order to keep that extra audience that we've built during the lockdown. But then you start talking yourself out of it to a certain extent, because during lockdown, there's also people who've become a bit reticent of travelling, and people who may decide, well, you know, I don't want to travel to London anymore, or I don't want to travel to Manchester anymore. And if you give them the virtual alternative, they may decide not to go to the physical event. But not, you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a bad thing if they say they're going to go to the physical event, but then in the back of their head they can always say, do you know what, even if I wake up on the morning, I can decide to watch it online, and that means there'll be an empty space in the physical event. So I agree that virtual hybrids are the way forward, but I think you've still got quite a lot of things to balance, and I don't yet know what that absolute balance actually is.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And that's why, you know, we must thank again 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and the conversations she's had with her clients, because they're saying this will take many conversations and the decision will be reached in multiple ways. And I suppose I use this article to illustrate the point that it's not as clear-cut as can't wait to go back to normal and drop the virtual. But it's not as clear-cut as, well, let's continue. You know, I think you have to really reflect on that. I mean, using your, you know, at the moment favorite 4 Ps, how do you price it between someone who attends physically and virtually, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, it's interesting. It's very, very timely. And for me, I'm doing a lot of research on behalf of my customers around the tech. So what would it take, for example, to film somebody on stage so they can be watched online? And again, for online not to be the poorer relation to the physical, and vice versa. How can you maybe invite a speaker to be streamed to the big screen whilst you are in the room, and make sure that that doesn't feel a lesser presentation to someone physically on stage. It's going to be absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I agree.
Super. Well, it's been a very enjoyable conversation on Content Spotlight, but let's see if we can surprise each other and viewers and listeners with the marketing, tech, and apps. Now, this is one of my favorite segments because every single week, I must confess, Roger, you surprise me, both in terms of what you were looking for, but also what you found. So what have you got for us this week to make life easier as a marketer?
Well, actually, some of the things I'm going to talk about this week are actually things that I've talked about before, but there's hopefully a slightly different angle that I want to take this week. So hopefully you'll forgive me for coming up with something I've talked about before. As you know, I subscribe to Adobe Creative Cloud, which is a suite of products which include Photoshop, and it includes Adobe Audition, which we do the audio version of this podcast on, and I get Adobe Premiere Pro as well, which I use for my 𝗏𝗏vlog videos, and sometimes I use Adobe After Effects as well to create a few special effects to go on those videos. But there's hundreds of other things within the Adobe Creative Cloud as well, you know, from raw photography to desktop publishing to just about anything you can think of. And you pay a monthly fee, and every year you renew on the 12th month anniversary. Now, one of the things that I find is that the average cost of the entire package is about 45 quid. You could subscribe just to Adobe Premiere Pro and it's more like $16.99 or something like that. But for the full package, it's 45 quid. Now, that's not a massive amount of money in the scheme of things for getting your hands on so many incredibly good tools. But sometimes, you know, I tend to use Premiere Pro and Audition mainly, and I sometimes think, is this actually too much money to spend on all of these things? But what I've found is that every year on the renewal, if you actually go onto the Adobe Creative Cloud renewal part of the website, you can actually play a game with them, which I don't know what they obviously know that this is happening, so it's part of the way that it works. But I've always found this works to my advantage, is that you end up trying to cancel your subscription, and it will say, if you cancel the subscription, you'll no longer have access to all of these great programs, and all the stuff that you've got stored in the cloud will be deleted. Is that really what you want? And you click yes, and then the next screen it comes up and says, almost like, are you absolutely and utterly sure? and this is the point where you start getting a bit scared and say, if I click yes, then they'll cancel it and it'll all disappear. But somebody once told me about 4 or 5 years ago that don't be scared, just click that extra button. So you do click that extra button, and their third attempt to get you to stay is usually some form of offer. And this has worked for me pretty much every year, except for the first year, obviously, that I end up getting some sort of discount. So this time, this year, on this renewal, I played the same game, so clicked 3 times, and when I thought they were about to throw me out, they offered me a reduction from £45 a month to £25 a month, and I've got that for the following year. So now, you know, I'm thinking, well, actually, even if I do use Premiere Pro and Audition mainly, you know, the single cost of a single thing is about 16 quid. So actually, I'm pretty much quids in getting the whole package for the cost of 2. So if you are subscribed to Adobe Creative Cloud and you have that same doubt as I do as to whether you are getting the value for money out of it, just try that little click at the end and see whether you get an offer. Now, I'm pretty sure that because we don't have millions and millions and millions of listeners to the Two Geeks in a Marketing podcast, that Adobe is suddenly going to wake up to this and change it all because of what I've just told you. I think our audience is perhaps not big enough yet to make such a mighty dint in the Adobe empire. So definitely worth trying that out.
To be honest with you, Roger, I had this image of the men in black from Adobe kidnapping you and me being left without a co-host for weeks on end, you know?
That's right, and they'll flashy thing me, so I've forgotten the fact that I can do this discount. So the second things that I really wanted to talk about is that, and I often forget this because in my head, Adobe is mainly the things that you have on your desktop. And in fairness, a lot of their programs, there are so many options, buttons, and trickeries that you need the big screen to play around with it. And video editing, you probably really need the big screen. But what I do forget is that Adobe have loads of apps as well for mobile phones, some of which are just really, really useful. And I came across this article which reminded me of three which are called Adobe Spark, but there are three versions. There's Adobe Spark Page, which is all about desktop publishing, and you might create graphics with it, or you could create an infographic, something like that. So it's mainly word-based and shapes. The second one is called Adobe Spark Post, which is where you might manipulate a photograph to add text to it, or manipulate a short video to add text to it. And then finally, Adobe Spark Video, which is mainly aimed at creating stories for things like Instagram stories or Twitter stories or LinkedIn stories. And these are powerful apps. And because you've paid your 25 quid or your 45, depending upon whether you got the discount, you automatically get all of these in your package. So you could be downloading all of these things onto your phone at the same time. I think you can get a phone version of Photoshop. There's definitely not a phone version of Adobe Premiere Pro, but some of the bigger suites do have mobile apps. So if you are using Adobe Creative Cloud, try to get that discount, and don't forget about all the great things like Adobe Spark that you can get access to on your phone.
Wow, I'm absolutely delighted for you, I must confess. That is something else, both in terms of, I think, to get a fair fee, because I think when the use level is intermittent, it is on the high side, I would say, but good on you. And of course, remembering about the mobile app. I mean, I've heard many people praising Spark, so yeah, well done.
Cool. So, Pascal, what have you got?
So for me, interestingly, this is all to do with the conversation we had last week. You remember in the Content Spotlight, you were mentioning your son writing an essay, and how the writing style was really different to what would be expected of him in the workplace. And I must confess, it stayed with me, this idea of the skill set of young people. And then a moment ago, we read in the news about LinkedIn and the Get Hired report. But also this week, I had a conversation with the local university, with their employability officer. And we were talking about the skill set and the needs of small business owners in and around content marketing, reputation management, and so on and so forth. And they agreed that, the university courses can only go so far, and that they are looking for what they call visiting lecturers, like people like you and I, to just give the young people an insight into the real world. And that got me thinking about a few years ago, I was invited to talk at a Durham University to their postgraduates, people who were on their way to looking for their first job. And to keep it short, really, I kind of shocked them into, making sure they had their own blog where they would just give a summary of what they've been learning, what was interest to them, that they had to get their LinkedIn profile just right, and so on and so forth. But the other thing that I said to them is, you want to understand what would be required of you, and you've got to be seen to have taken the initiative by educating yourself beyond the courses available to you. So this is where these two platforms come in, Roger, to supplement your CV, your LinkedIn profile, your blog, but also at the first interview to really impress your future employers with you taking the initiative by simply going online and taking time to self-study using online courses. That supplements, obviously, the skill set that is required of you. So there's many options out there, but the two that I've chosen are in and around this idea of first impressions and creating impact during the interview. So you have Coursera.org, course and then RA, Coursera.org. They've got free courses. You also have paying courses, and the fees are very, very low from international recognized universities and brands. So if you want to say that you went on a course on the subject of interest to your employer from Stanford University, Yale, If you are studying, for example, management in the creative, the art of fashion, Università Bocconi from Milan, Erasmus University from Rotterdam, Google, IBM, they're all there with free to very low fee courses. That's worth a few hours of your time a week to do a course, complete the course, and have at least theory, if not practical knowledge of what will be required of you by your employer. The second option is more of a UK-centric option called futurelearn.com. Again, free or very low-fee courses from leading universities, including Glasgow and Edinburgh, Roger. But if you want to learn more about business management, if you want to get into the creative arts and media, politics, IT and computer science and language, I would definitely look into futurelearn.com. There are courses delivered using, of course, video, audio, and downloads by lecturers, professors, and more that really can supplement your profile and build your career and take the initiative, which is really the advice I've given to young people for some years now.
This is all good stuff. And I've looked at a few things like this before, Pascal, but as you would expect, there's so much stuff out there, and some of it has a good reputation. Some of it has just been cobbled together. Some of it is backed by universities like this, and it's a little bit like you just don't know where to start. So it's really good that you've done this and actually zoomed in on a couple of real high quality sets of courses, and I can't wait to actually dive in and have a look and see if there's anything in there that grabs my attention.
Or indeed, to your point, I mean, my focus is around young people and employability, but that's for everybody. So let's reverse engineer that. You know the kind of jobs you want to apply for. Go online, look at the job descriptions, look at the skills or the experience. Find the course on Coursera and FutureLearn, and at least you're not going into the interview on the back foot.
Absolutely right. No, it's all good stuff. and I'm always saying this, have been saying this. We're always learning. You and I have been doing marketing for decades, but we do learn things new every day. And there's nothing to be ashamed of at self-developing like this.
Absolutely. Now, Roger, none of this would be possible without the work of pioneers and visionaries from the recent and distant past. Let's move on to This Week in History.
In 1215, the Magna Carta is signed by King John, declaring the sovereign to be the subject of the rule of law and documenting the liberties held by free men.
Wow, well, in 1878, the world's first moving pictures are caught on camera by Edward Muybridge, who used 12 cameras, each taking one picture to see if all 4 of the horse's hooves left the ground.
I really like that. In 1910, the first Father's Day is celebrating in Spokane in Washington. This holiday is generally attributed to Sonora Smart Dodd, whose father, a Civil War veteran, raised her and 5 siblings after their mother died in childbirth.
Wow, I didn't know that. Well, in 1942, Ferdinand Porsche starts working on the first prototypes of the people's car, also known as the Volkswagen Beetle. The final original Type 1 VW Beetle, listen to this, Roger, 21,529,464, rolled off the production line at Puebla, Mexico on the 30th of July 2003.
Goodness gracious. In 1963, Soviet cosmonaut Valentina Tereshkova became the first woman to travel in space aboard the spacecraft Vostok 6, which completed 48 orbits in 71 hours.
And in 1975, Jaws, based on the book by Peter Benchley and directed by Steven Spielberg, is released. It won several awards for its music and editing and is regarded as a watershed moment in motion picture history.
In 1976, the Viking 1 spacecraft reaches the planet Mars 10 months after being launched from Earth. 1 month later, Viking 1 would become the first US spacecraft to successfully soft land and perform a mission on Mars.
In 1991, Robin Hood, Princess of Thieves, starring Kevin Costner, Elizabeth Montecchio, Morgan Freeman, and the late Alan Rickman, is released in the US and becomes the second highest-grossing movie of the year.
Wow. I can't believe that that's 30 years ago.
30 years ago. Let's do this chronologically. Oh, thanks, by the way, for a reminder about the Magna Carta for the next pub quiz, or Richard Osman's House of Games. 1878, Edward Muybridge using 12 cameras to essentially create a moving film, moving pictures, to prove that when the horse is galloping, the four hooves are lifting the ground, because to the human eye you can tell. Now, what is interesting is I've seen many of his work, because there's also gymnasts, when they're jumping, and they're all known and around the web. But he himself, I don't think is that well known, and I think that's a crime.
Yeah, I've never heard of the guy before, which is why this piece of news is so joyous. And I can't believe it was so early as well. I mean, 1878. But he was using these 12, the thought process of actually setting the cameras up, presumably in a string, in a line, in order to compensate for the movement of the horse as well. But the genius in it is, I'm trying to prove whether a horse actually is flying at a certain point, I guess.
What is interesting, and that you can impress friends and family with, a couple of years later, he did the test with 24 cameras. Which led us to the 24 frames per second.
I didn't know that either. So is that where 24 frames a second comes from?
It will be, because 24 images and then showing the movement in a much clearer way. And we've kind of stuck with it for quite some time. So, I was really pleased to have discovered this, and was completely perplexed as a bit of a movie nerd myself to either have forgotten or completely missed the history and the contribution of Edward Muybridge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love to celebrate people that we've never heard of, but at least now we know.
Now, have you ever had the pleasure of owning or driving a VW Beetle car?
Well, I've never owned one, but yes, I have driven one. And it's a great, iconic car, isn't it? It seems to me that pretty much every country and every car manufacturer has the sort of workhorse car that rolled off the production line in its millions. So obviously the Volkswagen Beetle. The French one, I might get this wrong, is it a 𝗓𝗏𝗃 or something like that?
𝗓𝗏𝗃, which was never near as classy and good looking as this Italian.
But having said that, they rolled those off the production line in the millions. And in Britain, of course, we have the original Mini. So, but the Volkswagen, I think, out of all three of those examples, probably has, well, some people might argue that the Mini does, but the Volkswagen Beetle does have that elegance of shape and the curves, doesn't it? It's so iconic. But this is a bit of a off the wall thing, Pascal. But this week I was sat out in the garden and I noticed a ladybird sat on one of our paving stones. So I got my iPhone out and I got up close and took a photograph of the ladybird, and I published the photograph on Facebook.
You did.
And said, here's this lovely ladybird. And I always feel that ladybirds are lucky, and I feel lucky seeing this ladybird. And one of my friends from America posted a reply on the post to say, do you call these things ladybirds? We call them ladybugs here in the States. And that triggered another memory from seeing this. They don't call Volkswagen Beetles in America. They call them Volkswagen bugs. So there must be some sort of beetle bug thing going on, because a ladybird is a beetle, isn't it? So ladybirds become ladybugs and Volkswagen Beetles become Volkswagen bugs.
But the car itself, you're right, in terms of its design, in terms of the curves, the colours and so on, it's so iconic. It's a marketing story success, if there is one. Featured in movies, of course, we know that. But when I used to go to the movies, there used to be an advert, before the main feature for Nescafe. It was a group of young men and women, very attractive, I will say, with surfboard kind of jammed into the car, driving the VW Beetle to the beach, jumping in the water and having a wonderful time. And I was thinking, I want this. I want the Beetle and the girls and the surfboards in that order, probably. But it was so iconic. And who would have thought? Because truly, to your point, it was meant to be dirt cheap, very reliable, very robust. You could really take little care of it and keep running.
Absolutely right. And I think I'm sure there was another advert as well. I think it was a coffee advert where a girl who'd obviously been dumped or had a bereavement or something, was driving along, and she parks on the edge of a cliff, and you think, oh no, she's going to do something awful. But actually she just gets a flask out and pours herself a coffee, and she sits in the doorway of a Volkswagen Beetle, or it could have been a 𝗓𝗏𝗃 perhaps, I can't remember, and the song comes over, I can see clearly now the rain is gone. So yeah.
Is this the first time we've sang on this podcast? Probably is.
Absolutely
and
right.
Should be the last as well.
I was going to say we'll never do it again, Pascal.
So I will resist temptation to go on about Jaws, being myself a self-appointed Jaws historian and nerd, but 75, Roger. A year later, which blew my mind because, of course, we saw the news recently of the Mars rover. 1976. I just can't even understand that we had the technology to send and have a spaceship going into spacecraft, should I say, going into Mars.
No, I wouldn't have said that either. Again, the time flies so fast these days that some of these things that I thought were only 10, 15 years ago are actually more like 30 or 40. It genuinely is quite frightening.
Finally, I'm guessing that you have seen Robin Hood, Princes of Thieves.
Yes,
this was mentioned as the second highest grossing movie of the year. Actually, it was the first one for a while. Then got taken over by Terminator 2. Mm-hmm. Until a few years ago, I didn't know this, but my mind was blown, Roger. Robin Hood, Princes of Thieves, there is a director's cut. Have you seen it before?
I think we may have done it. It's obviously longer, although it's such a long time since I watched either the original version or the extended version. I couldn't tell you what the difference was. But again, it's one of those iconic movies which will probably have to be in our film marketing section at some point. Alan Rickman is incredible as the Sheriff of Nottingham. Some of his one-liners are, eat your eyes out with a spoon or something. Yeah. Absolutely incredible. He's so good. He was such a good actor. But of course, the other incredible thing about this film is that the song, Everything I Do For You by Bryan Adams, still holds the record to this day of the longest period of time at number one in the UK singles charts, which I think is 17 weeks, maybe 16 Something or 17 weeks, and it's never been beaten. And, so not only have you got an incredibly iconic movie, but you've also still got one of the most best-selling singles of all time.
Yeah, I mean, the movie I would watch happily. Now, I actually would favour the longer version because we discover more backstory for the Sheriff of Nottingham. And for me, I mean, it's lovely. You discover things at all times. I think I only became aware of the longer version 2-3 years ago. What I will say when it comes to the song, I'd be happy not to hear it ever again. But sorry, Brian, but that's obviously part of the fact that she's been played so much on the radio and everywhere else, including sporting events and awards and that kind of things.
Absolutely, yeah. He's got some better songs as old Brian, I have to say. I'll probably stick with Summer of '69 and Somebody and that sort of thing.
This has been wonderful, Roger. To again reminisce and talk about our kind of teenage years and more. But let's go back into the present with the creator shoutouts.
Let's do it.
Now, in this segment, Roger and I celebrate the work of content creators out there. So who is in the spotlight for you today, Roger?
Okay, this week I'm giving a shout out for a gentleman called 𝗧𝗵𝗲. Now, sometimes you because we're marketers, Pascal, we talk about marketing all the time. You sort of have that when we're shouting people out, it's got to be some sort of marketing orientated content. But of course, that's not the case. We're wanting to encourage people to create content for whatever industry it is that they work in. Now, I met Steve many years ago when he was part of the CMA Live community. Steve is a fitness instructor. Now, as you know, I do a bit of fitness instructing and yoga teaching on the side as well. But Steve specialises in helping the over 40s get fitter and start setting fitness goals for themselves. And he embraced content marketing quite early and frequently puts out videos mainly on Instagram, sometimes on other platforms, maybe like LinkedIn and Facebook, mainly Instagram. And they're only quite short segments, maybe only about a minute, 90 seconds. But they're always very good, very precise, and very helpful. And again, focused in on that niche of the over 40s. And I just came across him again today on LinkedIn and thought, I really need to give this guy a shout out because his stuff is so good. And the other thing that he does, mainly on Instagram, is that he tends to go out for a run every morning, sometimes scarily early, I have to add, when I'm probably still in bed. And he takes some of the most phenomenal photographs of the area around where he lives and where he runs, which is up in 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝗃, over the Forth Bridge and towards the Highlands. And honestly, some of those photographs are absolutely stunning, especially the early morning ones with the mist and sometimes some castles and bridges and that sort of thing. So if you are over 40 and you are looking for some fitness tips specifically tailored towards you, check out Steve Bonthrow and also some of those amazing photographs.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to have something a bit different today, Roger. Now, do you enjoy, when it is obviously appropriate, do you enjoy using PowerPoint, Microsoft PowerPoint?
I have a love-hate relationship with PowerPoint. Long time ago, I used to be the king of PowerPoint, and I would do a presentation with 100 slides. Now, I tend to use PowerPoint sparingly, and mainly using photographs and maybe one or two words. But yeah, PowerPoint is part of the speaker's content kit, isn't it? Ammunition bag. So yeah, I use PowerPoint.
I'm a big fan. I use it, and sometimes I like to be very creative with it. And I certainly, for a long time, like you, believe that I understood and knew PowerPoint. That is until I came across this YouTube channel. There is a gentleman who calls himself 𝗏𝗧𝗃, which I believe must be a play on word for his name, who has a YouTube channel called 𝗏𝗧𝗃 PowerPoint. And oh my goodness, I feel the need to refresh my skills and update my skills and bring new life really to my PowerPoint presentations, because you and I will continue to do the work that we do. We'll continue to provide a learning experience, whether that is face-to-face and online. And you mentioned a moment ago, we should always keep learning new things. Well, 𝗏𝗧𝗃 has got your back. He has obviously free content. You can also support him on Patreon for his templates and tutorial. But I made some notes. So, for example, would you like to know how to make some parallax effects for your slide transitions? Would you like to do some 3D effects, brush animation to reveal photography? Would you like to do some cinematic video introductions to your course? Would you like to be able to do some sliding sidebar menu, infographics, mirror morph effects with your content, float effects on graphics, and the list goes on and on and on, and all this on PowerPoint, including obviously using some of the more hidden features and bells and whistles of the platform. So 𝗏𝗧𝗃, originally from his biography, is from Vilnius in Lithuania. And I can't remember whether you'd been there, Roger, as part of your travels as a speaker. Have you not been to Lithuania?
I've not been to Lithuania, no.
Yeah. So I think he's now probably moved into the US, judging from the YouTube channel. But honestly, 𝗏𝗧𝗃, I can't thank you enough for being such an inspiration to all of us presenters. I wish you the very best. And for all of you, go on this channel. And if you think it's appropriate, do support him on Patreon, because the advice he's sharing is just incredible and will transform your enjoyment of using PowerPoint. So that's for you, Roger, but also bring new life to your presentation slides for your audience out there.
Wow. I mean, it's interesting. I frequently go on YouTube looking for tips on how to use Adobe Premiere Pro and Photoshop and all of those things that I mentioned earlier in the show. It wouldn't have occurred to me to have done the PowerPoint.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely not. So, yeah, I will check that out and find out and certainly and see.
Excellent. Roger Edwards, it is time for film marketing.
It is.
So, Roger, the many movies we've chosen film marketing, they have a special place. And almost like music, they take you to a time in your life that is important, or an event that you can relate to. This film is officially the very first movie I saw at UK cinemas when I arrived in the UK 30 years ago.
Wow. What is it? What is it? What is that first film?
Silence of the Lambs. 1991.
Silence of the Lambs.
I arrived in April 1991, the 13th of April 1991, to be precise. And a few months later, plucked up the courage to go to the movies with my broken English and sat there and listened intently to what was going on to be able to keep up, which probably made it even more scary for me, and introduced myself, you, and the world to probably one of the scariest villain of all times, Dr. Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah, now, again, I mean, it was huge at the time, wasn't it? And here we are again, a film that's 30 years old. But yes, absolutely remembered how utterly scary Anthony Hopkins was and how incredible his performance was. And he won an Oscar for it, didn't he? Which is good. And the thing is, as I remember at the time, a few years prior to Silence of the Lambs, there was actually another film called Manhunter.
Brilliant, yeah.
Which was based upon one of Thomas Harris's earlier Hannibal Lecter books. And it did have Hannibal Lecter in it, but he was played in that film by Brian Cox. So I was aware of Hannibal Lecter already, but the difference in the performance that Anthony Hopkins put in as Hannibal Lecter was he almost leaped out of the screen, didn't he? Grabbed you by the scruff of the neck and started to strangle you as he was acting. It was that powerful. So we, as is always the case when we do these film marketing sessions, Pascal, is we watched Silence of the Lambs again last night, and we both came to the conclusion, my wife and I, that it's actually quite a lot longer than we thought since we've last watched it. Maybe it could be over 10 years. So first of all, we were absolutely amazed by how young Jodie Foster looked, and even Anthony Hopkins for that matter, I guess. But again, once again, utterly compelling performances from both of them, and especially Anthony Hopkins, scary as hell.
So you're absolutely right. I remember I read Red Dragon, which is the first installment. I've not read the book Silence of the Lambs. I did read afterwards Hannibal, which I think is the trilogy. But what a film. And 91, just quickly on this, Roger, what a year for film goers. I must have spent my entire year at the movies because, well, we mentioned a moment ago, obviously there was Robin Hood, but there was Terminator 2. Which was the number one high-grossing movie after that. But Point Break, one of my all-time favorites. Cape Fear, Thelma and Louise, Backdraft, The Rocketeer, my guilty pleasure.
Oh my goodness.
Double Impact with Van Damme was around, Boys in the Hood, and the list goes on and on and on. Yeah. But I think that this is the movie that pretty much claimed the audience attention and critics alike for 1991.
Absolutely right. It was so memorable. And again, do you know, this might be a little bit controversial, but we watched it again last night, and the scenes between Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins, Clarice Starling, she's the FBI agent, and Hannibal Lecter, the psychopath, they're just so epically well acted and so scary and so compelling that actually I found the rest of the film, when he isn't in it interacting with Clarice, I found that part of the film was actually, do you know, this could just be any old police procedure. But it was those scenes that stood out. And actually, I guess that maybe we've seen those scenes between Clarice and Lecter so many times in clips and on shows and on YouTube, that actually was a lot of the rest of the film which I'd forgotten about. And I couldn't even remember, especially a lot of the scenes with them actually doing the investigative work. And I think it just really brought home to me how incredible those double scenes were with those two actors. But when you actually add up the amount of time that those two spend on screen together out of a 2-hour movie, I mean, I haven't done the maths, but probably no more than 20 minutes, if that. But what an incredible 20 minutes that is, and it almost eclipses the whole of the rest of the film for me.
I would agree. And what is interesting is, according to movie experts, if there is such an occupation, this is actually referred to as a horror movie, which is interesting because to me it was a thriller. But then when you start to watch it again, as we did too last night, Roger, this is lovely homework to do, you realize this is truly horrible. I mean, this is obviously Hannibal Lecter and Buffalo Bill, played superbly by Ted Levine as well. I mean, those actors, including Scott Glenn, they put their heart and soul into the performance. But also, let's compliment the music, 𝗏𝗏, which is just stunning, and the direction of Jonathan Dimmer, who has had an interesting kind of career, starting at the Roger Corman, kind of Academy of Filmmaking, but also did a lot of kind of movie around music, concerts and documentaries and so on. And this was his breakthrough movie. A couple of years later, he did Philadelphia as well. But the way which he brought the camera right into the face of Hannibal Lecter, there was no... he couldn't get away, he had to act and be sincere, always be able to tell by the way in which they use the light. This is something that I must confess, from the 90s and 2000s, I don't think movies nowadays use light as much, or lack of light, which is often the case. And a moment ago you mentioned it, but this won 5 Oscars: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Adaptation of a Screenplay. Absolutely incredible. And I was saying to Denise, you know what? One day I'd love to watch this in black and white to see how that works in terms of the tension. But really, really a lovely film, and it'd be interesting to watch it with a younger audience as well, to see how they deal with it. But for me, I made some notes to myself, the opening sequence as well, very cleverly done, where you see the character of Clarice, and the first words that are uttered in the film is her surname, Starling. And then there's this instruction to go into see her superior. There's no other words, and then there's her entering the room. We see the photography so within minutes we kind of visually are told everything we need to know about this movie. So I've got some questions for you. Why do you think the character of Jack Crawford, played by Scott Glenn, sent Clarice, a trainee, to see Dr. Hannibal Lecter? Was it because he couldn't be bothered? Is it because he wanted to throw him off course almost? What do you think was the intention there?
Very good question. I mean, and there are so many answers. I mean, he could have just thought that Hannibal Lecter might have reacted better to a pretty girl, or maybe he was scared to go himself. That did occur to me, that the guy who's effectively running that department of the FBI had met his match, if that was possible, and just didn't want to face off to it. Maybe he just felt that it was the ultimate training for Clarice to be put in that position. So I guess there are all sorts of different answers, and I guess we'll never know what the actual answer was.
I wouldn't thank you if I was a trainee. Thanks, boss. I think I'll continue to go to the classroom. I don't want to meet this psycho. But that's true. And what is interesting, the whole film is about Clarice, in fairness. And I think that's what's very, very clever about this story. There's been spin-offs, you could call them, Roger, the TV series and other films where it's all about Hannibal. And what I will say is that it's nowhere near as interesting, because I think it is between, Hannibal Lecter and Clarice. That's what, is interesting to me.
Yeah. And again, I think you're absolutely right. I think we managed to watch 2 episodes of the series of Hannibal and didn't like it at all. I believe there is a series about Clarice as well. I think it is actually just called Clarice, and it's currently running, so it's quite new. I think it's only been running for about 10 episodes. I couldn't tell you where it is, whether it's on Netflix or Amazon or wherever it is, but I do know that it's got some good reviews, so that might be worth checking out. But I think that you're absolutely right. Lecter works best when he's in the background, and that's what I say. He's not really on the screen for more than about 20 minutes. The rest of it is about Clarice. And I think I remember the first film whether you watched Manhunter, which was the original version, or Red Dragon, which was the version that Anthony Hopkins did later, again, it was more about the relationship between Will Graham and Lecter, as opposed to it all being about Hannibal. And again, he was in the background for most of that film too. And I think that's the way it should be.
Absolutely. So when it all started, I've seen this film so many times. I used to own the VHS cassette, but I actually didn't bother with the upgrade to DVD and Blu-ray, probably because I've got everything in my head.
Yeah.
So I was a bit concerned that I might just be nonplussed by the film, but actually it worked. The descent into the cells to meet Dr. Hannibal Lecter the first time still worked for me. And the reveal when he's standing there looking so incredibly scary. When he's strapped up, do you remember that scene? Well, of course you did last night. When he's strapped up, he's got a mask on and he's talking to the senator about her daughter.
Yeah.
When he escapes, I mean, that escape, so scary. But then the character Buffalo Bill, and what I call his metamorphosis, to use the analogy with the butterfly, the moth. And can I just say, this must have been the worst cellar I've ever seen in a property before. So when Clarice goes down, I mean, it's like a maze, isn't it?
It's like a labyrinth, all the doors.
Oh, God.
And it echoes an earlier scene where she's practicing, going into a building, and she gets picked up by one of the instructors for not doing the right pattern or something. And he says, that's why you just got shot. And then when she's actually in the cellar, she's having to do it properly because her life is absolutely at risk. But where is he going to jump out from? He's going to jump out any moment.
The whole last act is so tense. So this movie is giving us some visuals that have been imprinted into our mind. I will never look at the death head moth the same way again. But also is giving us some pretty scary strap lines that people have been repeating now for 3 decades.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the fava beans. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti. That's terribly scary. And even his last throwaway line, I'm having an old friend for dinner. Oh, wow.
I remember chuckling at the movies, but it was that nervous chuckle thinking, because you kind of know that he's going to obviously go ahead with his promise. I had a friend that whose party trick was he could imitate Buffalo Bill and say it puts the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again. And I mean, not something that no one should be proud of, but he was very good at it, and he used to amuse us no end at the pub at the time.
Yeah. So it's a 30-year-old film. So what do we know about the marketing, apart from the fact the poster was pretty iconic?
Yeah, I want to talk about the poster in a moment because I think it's at the heart of its marketing campaign. But to begin with, let's talk about the release. In the US, this was released on Valentine's Day, 1991. Why wouldn't you? That's a lovely, date movie. But the reason for that, and I think there's 2 or 3 good decisions that the producers and Orion at the time took, and one is around timing. And the first one about timing, this in the US was officially a 4-day weekend. So from a pure commercial point of view, Roger, they had 2 extra days of earnings, which meant that, of course, they got the PR machine kicking in, saying, wow, this is the highest grossing movie ever, and it's bloody scary. And then the printing media, TV and radio took over.
Yes. Again, it reminds me that in those days, films opened in the States quite a lot earlier than they did around the rest of the world, and that allowed some of the clips to be shown on news channels, to be shown on programs like Screen Test or whatever it might be, to build up the anticipation for when it was going to be released in the UK. That never really happens anymore. Mainly, films get released within days of each other because we know that give it more than a couple of hours and everything will be all over the internet anyway.
So, I mean, interestingly, we are almost to the day celebrating 30 years of Silence of the Lambs, because this was June 1991, the premiere at the Odeon Leicester Square, which is usually where it happens. And by that time, people knew just a bit more about the movie. And then using what you mentioned a moment ago, the poster was really quite enigmatic. But this is interesting for us to look back at the poster 30 years later, because when you go to, kind of wait outside, waiting for your turn to enter the screening room, and you see this poster, it really is a strange one, because unless you've seen the film or perhaps read the book, the elements in the poster really give you quite intrigued, wouldn't you say? Because you don't know about the moth, you don't know necessarily about the victim being kind of having their skin removed. So this poster is almost a payoff after the film, not before.
Yeah, I never thought of it like that again. It's a very enigmatic post. I mean, the moth itself is so striking, and the fact that it's they've done a little bit of visual trickery with the moth, because I have seen a death's head moth before, and the skull isn't quite as intricately drawn as that on the actual moth itself. But again, the silhouette of the woman, who I assume is Clarice, has actually got red eyes, which I always thought was quite scary.
Well, for years I thought it was one of the victims. So, and that's opened the debate: is it Clarice? Is it one of the victims? If people want to, you go online and find the poster, the original one, because unfortunately then they messed with it for the recent iterations of the Blu-ray. They've added Hannibal Lecter and so on. But if you zoom right into the moth, you will see that the skull is shaped by the naked body of women, inspired by a artwork from Dali. You will see, if you zoom in, 7 women.
Right.
And again, where the poster pays off is, if you've seen the film, you know that there's been 5 victims. Then there is Catherine, the senator's daughter, in the well, and then you've got Clarice, which make 7.
Gosh, I never knew that. That's incredible. And I'm even looking at the movie poster on my screen at the moment, and I can't get close enough to it to see that, but it does look like a skull to me. But now I look even closer, I can see the detail that you're talking about there.
It's because ultimately Buffalo Bill could have killed her, and Catherine would have made 7. So I like this, and this idea of a poster being more than just the teaser. It's actually a reward for seeing the film, where you've got a bit of complicity with the filmmakers, and that's the first time that I've seen something done in that way. And I think that's been at the heart of the campaign. But also this juxtaposition, because you've got the poster, then you've got a great trailer. Even 30 years later, if you watch it, it does stack up. But then there's no reference to the moths in the trailer. There's even no reference. And it's really quite interesting what they're trying to do here, where they're trying to appeal to different audiences, or literally give us something almost like a red herring, which has been at the heart of the way Hannibal Lecter kind of plays, like a cat would play with a mouse with Clarice.
Yeah, I think that there is an element of the producers playing with us in the same way as Lecter plays with his victims and gets into the heads of the people he interacts with.
Back to playing, and I think, what wouldn't you be playful? And maybe that's one of the marketing lessons. Do something extra with your visuals.
Yes.
But also, absolutely, again, with the mindset of you and I being video producers and live streamers, but also learning the language of cinema. When you watch the trailer 30 years later, and the first words you hear are, "Do you spook easily, Starling?" And Clarice replies, "Not yet, sir."
Not yet.
You actually now understand they were asking the audience, "Do you spook easily?"
Yes.
Not yet. I said, well, spend 2 hours in the company of Hannibal Lecter, and you might.
Yeah, no, it's very, very clever. And sometimes trailers these days aren't as subtle as that. They just give you effectively a précis of what's happening in the entire film. But that was genuinely, those words were selected to talk directly at the audience.
Yeah, and to your point, this was made 30 years ago, so the marketing campaign won't be multifaceted and as complex as a movie done today. But they did 2 things really well. They got the timing right in terms of the release.
Yeah.
They got a poster that was a talking point, and they got the trailer that really, really set the tone of the intrigue superbly well. Like, you can watch it again. And then, of course, they piggybacked and fueled the PR machine. But being a complete movie nerd, of course, I did a bit more research about the timing. And what was interesting is that this movie originally was scheduled for late 1990. because they were hoping to kind of sync it with festivals and the likes. But actually, they realized that if they did so, this movie would be overshadowed by Dances with Wolves,
Right.
which is also a co-production with Orion, which, by the way, won the Oscar as well. So they waited a bit longer because they thought, we've got the chance there to win not just this year, but next year's Oscar with this movie. So let's delay the release by 4 or 5 months, which must have felt very brave at the time, maybe a bit frustrating for the actors as well. But timing, Roger, once again.
Absolutely. It's always about timing.
So if you have not seen Silence of the Lambs for a while, I think you can take it from Roger and I, go back and watch it, and then immerse yourself a little into the marketing. Look at the poster again, look at the trailer, and ask yourself the question, which is really at the heart of this segment. Are there any lessons that I can take into my business, into my creative endeavors, and more? Roger Edwards, this has been episode 45. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful co-host and for your many insights and conversations. For you out there, please leave comments and suggestions in the usual places. And to the next one, go out there and make sure your marketing is done right. I was Pascal Fintoni and he was Roger Edwards.